Meskhetian Turks, also known as Meskheti Turks, and Akhaltsikhe/Ahiska Turks, Turkish, Ahıska Türkleri, Georgian, Turkic meskhebi, are the ethnic Turks formerly inhabiting the Meskheti region of Georgia, along the border with Turkey. The Turkish presence in Meskheti began with the Ottoman invasion of 1578, although Turkic tribes had settled in the region as early as the 11th and 12th centuries. The origin of the Meskhetian is still unexplored and highly controversial. But now it seems to emerge two main directions. The pro-Turkish direction, the Meskhetians were ethnic Turks, in which some Georgian were ethnic parts. The pro-Georgian direction, Georgian historiography has traditionally argued that the Meskhetian Turks, who speak the Kars dialect of the Turkish language and belong to the Hanafi school of Sunni Islam, are simply Turkified Georgians converted to Islam in the period between the 16th century and 1829, when the region of Meskheti-Dzhavakheti was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. However, Anatoly Mikhailovich has argued that it is quite possible that the adherents of this view oversimplified the ethnic history of the group, particularly if one compares it with another Muslim Georgian group, the Adzar, who in spite of their conversion to Islam have retained, not only the Georgian language, but to some extent also the Georgian tradition, culture and self-identification. Contrary to this, the traditional culture of Meskhetian Turks, though it contained some Georgian elements, was similar to the Turkish one. Catherine Tomlinson has argued that in Soviet documents about the 1944 deportations of the Meskhetian Turks they were referred to simply as Turks, and that it was after their second deportation from Uzbekistan that the term Meskhetian Turks was invented. Furthermore, according to Ronald Wixman, the term Meskhetian only came into use in the late 1950s. Indeed, majority of the Meskhetians call themselves simply as Turks or Ahiska Turks, Ahıska Türkleri, referring to the region, meaning Turks of Ahıska region. The Meskhetians claim sometimes that the medieval Cumans Kipchuks of Georgia, Kipchuks in Georgia, may have been one of their possible ancestors. In 1578, the Ottoman Empire managed to conquer Meskheti during the Ottoman Safavid War, 1578–1590, although it was not secure as a part of the Ottoman Empire until 1639, when a treaty was signed and brought an end to Persian attempts to retake the region. Soviet rule. According to the 1989 Soviet census, there were 207,502 Turks living in the Soviet Union. However, Soviet authorities recorded many Meskhetian Turks as belonging to other nationalities such as Azeri, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and Uzbek. Hence, official censuses do not necessarily show a true reflection of the real population of the Meskhetian Turks. For example, according to the 2009 Azerbaijani census, there were 38,000 Turks living in the country. However, no distinction is made in the census between Meskhetian Turks and Turks from Turkey who have become Azerbaijani citizens, as both groups are classified in the official census as Turks or Azerbaijani. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees report published in 1999, that 100,000 Meskhetian Turks lived in Azerbaijan, and the defunct Baku Institute of Peace and Democracy stated, in 2001, that between 90,000 and 110,000 Meskhetian Turks lived in Azerbaijan. Similarly, academic estimates have also suggested that the Meskhetian Turksish community of Azerbaijan numbers 90,000 to 110,000. More recently, some Meskhetian Turks in Russia, especially those in Krasnodar, have faced hostility from the local population. The Krasnodar Meskhetian Turks have suffered significant human rights violations, including the deprivation of their citizenship. They are deprived of civil, political, and social rights and are prohibited from owning property and employment. Thus, since 2004, many Turks have left the Krasnodar region for the United States as refugees. A large population of which comprises nearly 1,300 individuals is in Dayton, Ohio. They are still barred from full repatriation to Georgia. Culture. Religion. Meskhetian Turks are predominantly Sunni Muslims with a Shiite Muslim minority. Language. The Meskhetian Turks speak an Eastern Anatolian dialect of Turkish, which hails from the regions of Kars, Ardahan, and Artvin. The Meskhetian Turkish dialect has also borrowed from other languages, including Azerbaijani, Georgian, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Russian, and Uzbek, which the Meskhetian Turks have been in contact with during the Russian and Soviet rule. 1944 Deportation from Georgia to Central Asia. On November 15, 1944, the then General Secretary of CPSU, Joseph Stalin, ordered the deportation of over 115,000 Meskhetian Turks from their homeland, who were secretly driven from their homes and herded onto rail cars. As many as 30,000 to 50,000 deportees died of hunger, thirst, and cold, and as a direct result of the deportations and the deprivations suffered in exile. The Soviet guards dumped the Meskhetian Turks at rail sidings across a vast region, often without food, water, or shelter. According to the 1989 Soviet census, 106,000 Meskhetian Turks lived in Uzbekistan, 50,000 in Kazakhstan, and 21,000 in Kyrgyzstan. As opposed to the other nationalities who had been deported during World War II, no reason was given for the deportation of the Meskhetian Turks, which remained secret until 1968. It was only in 1968 that the Soviet government finally recognized that the Meskhetian Turks had been deported. The reason for the deportation of the Meskhetian Turks was because in 1944 the Soviet Union was preparing to launch a pressure campaign against Turkey. In June 1945 Vyacheslav Molotov, who was then Minister of Foreign Affairs, presented a demand to the Turkish ambassador in Moscow for the surrender of 3 Anatolia provinces, Kars, Ardahan, and Artvin. As Moscow was also preparing to support Armenian claims to several other Anatolian provinces, war against Turkey seemed possible, and Joseph Stalin wanted to clear the strategic Georgian-Turkish border where the Meskhetian Turks were settled and who were likely to be hostile to such Soviet intentions. Unlike the other deported Muslim groups, the Meskhetians have not been rehabilitated nor permitted to return to their homeland. In April 1970, the leaders of the Meskhetian Turkish national movement applied to the Turkish embassy in Moscow for permission to emigrate to Turkey as Turkish citizens if the Soviet government persisted its refusal to allow them to resettle in Meskheti. However, the response of the Soviet government was to arrest the Meskhetian leaders. 1989 Deportation from Uzbekistan to other Soviet countries. In 1989, riots broke out between the Meskhetian Turks who had settled in Uzbekistan and the native Uzbeks. Nationalist resentments against the Meskhetians who had competed with Uzbeks for resources in the overpopulated Fergana Valley boiled over. Hundreds of Meskhetian Turks were dead or injured, nearly 1,000 properties were destroyed and thousands of Meskhetian Turks fled into exile. The majority of Meskhetian Turks, about 70,000, went to Azerbaijan, whilst the remainder went to various regions of Russia, especially Krasnodar Krai, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Ukraine. Today, the Meskhetian Turks are widely dispersed throughout the former Soviet Union, as well as in Turkey and the United States, due to forced deportations during World War II. At the time, the Soviet Union was preparing to launch a pressure campaign against Turkey, and Joseph Stalin wanted to clear the strategic Turkish population in Meskheti who were likely to be hostile to Soviet intentions. In 1944, the Meskhetian Turks were accused of smuggling, banditry and espionage in collaboration with their kin across the Turkish border. Approximately 115,000 Meskhetian Turks were deported to Central Asia and only a few hundred have been able to return to Georgia ever since.